So our next speaker is Professor Anja Belz from Brighton University, who works on language generation, and she's going to tell us why she's going to tell us about automated journalism and why we should care about non-fake news generation.
Right, so I'm Anja Belz. I'm a researcher in natural language generation. And so this has been a particularly interesting year for natural language generation. First, in February, OpenAI created a language model that it declared too dangerous to share for fear of it being used to unleash a torrent of fake news on the world. Then, a few months later, the first fully automatic news agencies went into production. The media went nuts. Oh, hang on, you're missing a slide here. It's not working. Okay, there we go. So that was the first headline about the too dangerous to release AI. And this is the second headline about automatic news generation going into production for the first time. So what I was saying was the general media barely registered the second, but went completely crazy over the first one. So it was kind of hard to miss, but just in case you did miss it, basically the media went into absolute conniptions about the OpenAI model, as you can see from these headlines. So even the otherwise very level-headed Financial Times bought into the whole too dangerous to share narrative. So what had happened, of course, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is that OpenAI, the non-profit AI research company co-founded by Elon Musk, had created a neural language model, which was for about a month the largest ever created. They put out a press release saying that their model was so good at writing new text that it couldn't be shared publicly for fear of it being misused for mass fake news distribution. So this here, again, probably quite a few have seen this before, is one of the examples they put on their website. It's a cute little text about unicorns. So at the top is the human-written prompt that you put into the system, and the rest of it is the output, the automatically generated output. This is only the first two paragraphs. The whole text they put on there is quite a bit longer. But even from this short bit of text, I think you can see it's quite well written. It reads well. And it's quite fun to play with the online interactive demo they put up, and people have been using it in their talks, and audiences have loved it because it does read quite well. Well, until you start noticing mistakes that probably a human writer would never make. So, for example, where did that four-horned come from? It probably should have been four-legged. And what does the after almost 2 centuries refer to? Where did that come from? Oh, and then also it took 10 tries, meaning 10 different ways of manipulating the prompt, the human-written prompt, to get a text this good. So, and then a few months later, another set of researchers demonstrated that these automatically generated text generated by a neural language model were actually quite easy to detect. So this here is the output of one of those tools, GLTR2 or Glitter2, when given the unicorn text that I was just showing you a minute ago. So simplifying quite radically, in this tool, the output that's highlighted in red and purple indicates a more human way of writing, and more green and yellow means more artificially generated. So no purple at all, just a few bits of red. This means that the output has been, the text has been quite clearly categorized as artificially generated. So it turns out that OpenAI-style neural generative language models produce text that is fairly easily identified by humans, can be automatically detected, hallucinates context. This is a term that my collaborator Ehud Reiter uses, and for all those reasons may not be quite as dangerous as the press release made out. Right, so the other thing I referred to in my first slides, the other headline, was about the advent of automatic news agencies. So a recent survey of 70 newsrooms across the world concluded that no one wants AI to fully replace humans in the newsroom, and no one is actively working towards that end. It's not quite true anymore in 2019, because the first fully automatic news agencies are now in operation, and they are providing completely automatically written news articles to print newspapers as well as online news outlets. And they are certainly aiming to fully replace humans in the newsroom, and they are actively working towards that end. So I want to talk to you about two example automatic news agencies, the only ones that I'm aware of that are fully automatic, Radar AI in the UK and Monarch in Sweden. So you may have heard of Radar. It's been in the news a little bit, and that news headline from the beginning of my talk was about Radar. So Radar specializes in fully generated, localized stories for regional newspapers. It started out as a joint venture between the Press Association and Urbs Media, supported by a hefty Google grant. So they specialize in data sets, periodic release, structured numerical data. So for example, the NHS periodically puts out a large data set. So what they do for each type of data set, so not for each release, but for each type of data set, there are 6 editors write templates that are structured into decision trees, so that for each generation process, a different path through the decision tree is taken depending on the identity and the location of the client newspaper, the time, and many other factors as well. So template generation, as I'm sure you're aware, has been around in newsrooms for quite a while, but this is probably the first time that it's gone into general interest stories. So you can probably just, sorry about the blurry pictures, the only one I had. The one you can probably make out is the one in the lower left. General interest stories like that, A&E feeling the heat in summer surge. So the local newspapers that buy these stories, and these are actual real front pages that have been published in print. So local newspapers don't tend to attribute this automatic generation. From reading the newspapers, you would never know that these stories have been automatically generated. So what they're always published with a human byline, even if in many cases the human in the byline has only just looked and approved the article. And just in case you've now got the impression that this is a tiny startup with no clients and no revenue, their biggest client owns 160 titles and receives roughly 700 stories per week from Radar. So the second news agency is Monarch in Sweden. And so they're very different for various reasons. For a start, it specializes in selling fully generated, tailored and multimodal, so with pictures and videos, etc., news stories to online news providers. The text generation that they use is also very different, being based on extractive, abstractive, multi-document, multimodal summarization. So what that means basically is that it extracts the most relevant small text snippets from a set of existing news articles online, and then combines them and paraphrases them into a new news article. And what exactly new means in this context, I'll come back to in a moment. So the resulting articles are then validated via plagiarism detection software, where, surprisingly, the artificially generated articles often fare better than the original articles that they were generated from. Source articles for the summarization process are taken from underlying news event graphs that they generate, which encode clusters of online news items that are related because they relate to the same news event. And these clusters dynamically merge and split as the news evolve and develop so that you can create new news events represented by clusters. So for Monarch 2, clients differ in their approach to attribution, to being transparent about about the provenance of their articles. But in most cases, in some cases, I should say, they acknowledge that it's artificially generated news, and it's kind of a selling point for them. But in a lot of cases, they just slap on a human byline and don't say anything about generation. So I said earlier that OpenAI-style generators were less worrying than they were made out to be in that OpenAI press release, because they hallucinate content, produce non sequiturs and similar mistakes. Moreover, they are fairly easily detected by humans, and we have automatic ways of detecting them. Well, none of those things apply to the automatic language generation methods that are actually being used in the real world by these new automatic news agencies. They don't hallucinate content. The automatic methods that work so well for language model-based generators don't work at all for them. And humans and Google Search Rank, and I will come back to that in a minute, can't tell either. So, apart from being hard to detect, automatic news the kind of automatic news that I've been talking about also have a range of other issues. These are around transparency, bias, and missing context, factual errors, and cases where, copyright issues where you have text that is entirely copied, but copyright apparently doesn't apply. And I'll go into a bit more detail about these. So, about detection, this is the same tool as I was showing you just now, Glitter 2, and the visualization is also the same before. So here we have two articles on the exact same topic. One is generated by the Monarch generator at the top, and the other one is written by a human at Fox News. So both texts, if you recall, more red and more purple means more human. So both texts are classified as probably human. And the interesting thing is that the Monarch text is classified as slightly more likely to be human than the Fox News text, which is an assessment that you may or may not be inclined to agree with, given that it's Fox News. Right, so summarization-based news generation ends up falsifying facts quite a lot, it turns out, and all of these are real-world examples from the Monarch generator. So, for example, named entities being switched during paraphrasing. So, for example, a Palestinian student at Harvard becoming a Greek student at Harvard. Some numbers being replaced with more frequent numbers, for example, 70-year-olds becoming 70-year-olds. Then you also get statements with similar meanings. You can trace where they came from in the original documents that were summarized, but they're not quite true. Something's gone wrong with the truth value. And this is something that happens especially with neural methods. There are also quite a lot of gender-related issues, for example, she being overwritten as he. Attribution is a big issue, which I've already said. So if there's no regulation around attributing automatically generated news, some editors will attribute the artificial generation and be transparent about it, and others won't. In fact, some editors don't think that it actually matters to be transparent about this, and that their readers don't care about it. So this here is the editor of a regional newspaper, a client of Radar's, cited in the FT back in June, saying that their readers can't tell which stories had been handwritten, and that, furthermore, they couldn't care less who wrote it, frankly. So, unsurprisingly, their boss at the parent company did not lose any time in writing to the editor and correcting that assessment. Note, however, that Mr. Carter is not saying anything here about whether they are being transparent about AI-generated news or what the editorial practice is the company in that respect. So another set of issue relates to bias and missing context with this kind of artificially generated news. Bias and misrepresentation can creep into generated articles from data and document sources. Automatic selection of input risks omission of important context, resulting in partial truths, untrue entailments, or even overtly false statements. These issues are clearly, some of these issues are clearly not unique to automatic news generation. So, as mentioned, summarization-based news generation gets around copyright by copying and paraphrasing text snippets to create a sufficiently new article on the same topic as the source documents. So what sufficiently new means here in this context is that plagiarism detection software fails and Google search doesn't downrank the articles. So astonishingly, articles can succeed in both of these things and escape all Google search penalties for automatically generated and non-unique content, which means that articles, news articles, are passing for human written and new, despite being neither. And what's more, methods are in development at the moment that do the exact same thing for images. So this addresses a big issue for generation of online news. You need images because online news doesn't exist without images, but copyright means you have to use images that are either old or aren't particularly well matched to your article. So the idea here is to take a bunch of images of the same event from different angles, in this example a news conference, and use them to generate a new image, a new photograph, which is a composite of the existing photographs and depicts the same event from a new angle. Clearly, this is a mock-up. This is not really produced by a system. These methods are in development, but they seem to me entirely feasible given what we can do these days with image processing. So, I took a look at the first two fully automatic news agencies that went into production this year, and I argued that they raise more issues worth worrying about than what have been termed OpenAI-style text spewers. So these issues include factual errors, fast and loose approaches to transparency, copyright loopholes, and missing context. So I think we can address some of these issues by developing new technology, automatic detection, fact-checking, missing context detection. I'm not saying they're easy, but it's a possibility. Equally importantly, other issues like transparency and copyright will need regulatory solutions of some sort. Now, in current work, we're looking at some of these. So we're looking at detection of summarization and template-generated text, and automatic fact-checking other than true and false. So from an NLP perspective, I think some of the most interesting work potential lies in this space is to look at issues around how to address missing context and what's the best way to fix generation-induced errors without throwing the whole fact-checking apparatus at it. So we're currently building partnerships in this area to address technological and self-regulatory needs, regulatory and self-regulatory needs, bringing together NLP researchers, fact-checking organizations, automatic and traditional news agencies, as well as journalists, lawyers, and responsible research and innovation experts, which I think is quite important because there's a lot of things we don't know about how news consumers view this whole space, how important it is to them to know whether an article has been artificially generated, for example. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then I'd love it if you came up and asked me some more questions about it. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Other questions?
Yes, I would like Walid Al-Saka from Southern University. I'd like to actually point out to something ironic, is that the tools that we use at the university in discovering plagiarism apparently have a lot in common with the bots or the tools that are being used. So is the technology already there? Do you see that there's some form of parallel, let's say, work in these two lanes that can be galvanized and unite forces to work together in some way?
Well, so Monarch are already using the exact same plagiarism detection tools that check for content online and compare it to, well, in the case of the university scenario, student submissions. So they're using those to validate their output. So either the plagiarism detector thinks that it's been plagiarized from other sources, then they have to do something else to the text, or it passes without being classified as plagiarized to any extent. Did you have something else in mind, or does that cover it? Mm.
If the technology is the same, it's not proprietary. That's what I meant. There might be new algorithms that are out there that are been hidden, or let's say not shared among these two groups of software developers.
Well, I suppose there are synergies that could be exploited.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but this was a fantastic talk, so thank you, Anja.
Thank you.
So